In my first semester at college, we all got an alert that there was a rapist on campus. Of course, that was all anybody talked about for a month, and of course, being college boys, we gathered weapons and fortified the dorm for an attack. And one of my friends said, I kind of hope he tries to break in, because if he does, we're gonna kill him. I mean, how often do you get the honor of beating a rapist to death with noodle swords? And on the one hand, I was like, hell yeah, let's get him. But at the same time, I remember thinking, he committed that crime 10 years ago. He's paid for his sins. Maybe killing him isn't justice at all. Or what if he's actually innocent? What if he's one of those guys that gets falsely accused? We ended up debating the death penalty. It's a big question, right? Should we execute murderers and rapists? On the one hand, if his victim had been my sister, I would have been like, okay, let's see how far we can stick this guy's head up a lawnmower. You can call that revenge, but honestly, I can't bring myself to say it's wrong. I have a very strong sense of justice. I want child traffickers to be burned at the stake. I want animal abusers to be publicly stoned. So my natural disposition is to be in favor of the death penalty. But a lot of people would disagree. A lot of people, on the left and the right, would say that execution is wrong.
Part 1. The left. What about restorative justice?
You're gonna execute that poor child rapist? How could you be so cruel? That child rapist is a human being. He only became a child rapist because of socioeconomic conditions. What he needs is restorative justice. The leftist argument against the death penalty is that instead of killing pedophiles and serial killers, we should send them to rehab. After a few years of meditation and nature walks, they can re-enter society as happy and productive citizens. For me, that seems a bit optimistic. You're assuming that these horrible, disgusting subhumans can be reformed. But what if they can't? What if 20 years later, they're still horrible, dangerous monsters? They still have no regrets about raping and torturing innocent people, and now we've wasted thousands of dollars giving them free group therapy sessions. Now, I agree, there's something very beautiful about the murderer who repents and starts a whole new life in the countryside of Thailand and grows into a whole new person. But that only works if he genuinely, deeply repents of his sins and turns his life around. Maybe he will, I hope he does. But I bet the vast majority will continue to be miserable, awful, disgusting people. Even if like 80% of these murderers and rapists can be reformed, I'd still support the death penalty. There needs to be a harsh punishment for these crimes so that people think twice before committing them. If you're some depressed maniac criminal and you know the only punishment for rape is being sent to rehab, you're a lot more likely to rape some girl than if the punishment is death. So restorative justice might be kinder to murderers, but it's crueler to everyone else. Leftists sure have a lot of sympathy for criminals, but they have no sympathy for the future victims of criminals. Criminals who might not have committed those crimes if they'd known the penalty would be death. And call me crazy, but I care more about innocent civilians than sadistic murderers.
Execution is cruel.
From the luxury of your living room, it's easy to say that the death penalty is cruel and murderers should be rehabilitated. But imagine it was your family that got slaughtered. How would you feel knowing that the maniac who butchered your family is alive and well at some rehab center while they're all dead in the grave? Not very good. I can't even imagine the anger, the resentment, the unfairness of it all. If their deaths traumatized you enough, you might be paranoid that he'll break out and come find you and kill you too. And don't give me this Hollywood bullshit about executing him won't bring your family back. No, it won't, but it will give you some peace of mind and some sense of justice in the world. And at the end of the day, I care more about closure for the families of victims than rehabilitation for the murderer.
Actually, execution is more expensive.
It's basic math. Taking the rapist out behind the courthouse and shooting him in the back of the head takes 2 minutes and 1 bullet. Obviously, that's way cheaper than feeding and housing him for the rest of his life in prison. Prisons are horrible, by the way, such a stupid waste of tax money. But leftists like to point out that actually, the death penalty is more expensive than life in prison. And that's actually true. Because of all the appeals and how long prisoners wait on death row, and all the human rights organizations coming in like, how could you do this? You're only killing him because he's a black man in America. He cannibalized a child. He only did that because of systematic racism. So in our current system, the death penalty is super expensive. That's why New Jersey banned the death penalty. Not because it's cruel or unjust, but because it's too damn expensive. So what's your response, Arthur? Isn't the death penalty bad because it's expensive? Well, first of all, I don't care if it's more expensive. It's worth it for justice and peace of mind for the families and deterring other people from committing those crimes. Secondly, the only reason it's so expensive is because of anti-death penalty activists making everything so difficult. Nobody should be waiting on death row for 30 years. Executing murderers should not be an expensive process. It should be as simple as, face the wall, son. Make your final confession. God be with your soul. Bam. Simple as that. The truth of the matter is that the death penalty is the will of the people. The average American wants their families to be safe, they want justice for victims, and they want psychopathic murderers to be shot. But the elites do not like the death penalty. As we all know, they love violent criminals, which is why they want them to vote and to be punished with therapy and fresh fruit. So what they've done is to take the death penalty away while pretending we still have it. It's a complete facade. Most Americans probably don't know this, but my dad's a prosecutor and he's told me all about it. They've made it so difficult to execute someone that it basically never happens. You have to have a perfect trial, which is impossible. There's all these appeals, and pretty much nobody ever gets executed, except for torturers, and even then it's like 15 years down the line. Then they make a whole big fuss about the method. No electric chair, no hanging, no shooting. It's like, dude, you're killing him. It doesn't matter how you do it, as long as it's instantaneous.
Risk of false punishment.
The biggest problem with the death penalty is that once you execute someone, if it turns out later that he was actually innocent, too late. You can't undo it. And leftists like to throw out these stats about 1 in 10 people executed is actually innocent. But I really don't buy that. You know how our culture is. There's all these powerful organizations that just love criminals, especially violent criminals. These sneaky lawyers come in, they call everyone racist, they do whatever they can to get rapists and psychopaths freed. So, sure, there may be a lot of people who get their sentence revoked by these elite leftist lawyers, so legally speaking, they're innocent. But I don't believe for a second that they're actually innocent. Now, I'm sure there are occasionally people who get falsely convicted, and that's a terrible tragedy. But in my humble opinion, the much greater tragedy would be abolishing the death penalty. Not only does it rob the victims' families of closure and peace, keeping violent criminals alive endangers the lives of prison guards, it endangers the lives of other prisoners, and it endangers the lives of more innocent civilians on the chance that some murderer escapes or gets released early. But maybe you're still not convinced. Even though the death penalty saves vastly more innocent lives than it takes, the idea of even one man executed for a crime he didn't commit is too much for you to handle. If that's how you feel, I totally understand. But frankly, you should stay out of politics. Politics is not for the weak. As Thomas Sowell said, there are no solutions, only trade-offs. Any decision you make will hurt some innocent people. But we have to be men. We have to do what needs to be done, and that means making tough decisions. It's easy to feel like you're such a good person when you're against the death penalty, and everyone will praise you for being so progressive and humanitarian. But the families of the victims and all the people stabbed and raped in prison riots, they know that your cowardice and your girlish inability to take the difficult trade-offs has ruined their lives.
Part 2. The right. The sanctity of human life.
An argument you'll hear from Christians, especially Catholics, is that execution violates the sanctity of human life.
How does killing, to say killing is wrong, make any sense? It just makes murderers of us all.
Now, I believe this argument comes from a good place. They're trying to be godly Christians and follow the teachings of the church. And if you oppose the death penalty on religious grounds, I respect that. However, I highly recommend the work of Ed Feser. He's a Catholic philosopher who advocates for the death penalty. I've linked 2 of his articles in the description. But even without diving into prudential versus binding judgments, the Christian opposition to the death penalty is a very modern phenomenon. The church throughout history has always supported the death penalty. We burn heretics, we kill tyrants, we kill murderers and rapists. If you read Old Testament law, God is very pro-death penalty. Leviticus commands the death penalty for murder, rape, adultery, bestiality, blasphemy, cursing your parents, and false witness. Old Testament God has no problem with execution, even in really violent ways like stoning people to death. He had the entire nation of Canaan slaughtered for their crimes. Do you really think he'd be squeamish about executing pedophiles? Yes, this is the Old Covenant, but there's nothing in the New Testament that says God changed his mind. The argument is that execution cheapens the sanctity of human life, but I actually think the opposite is true. The whole reason we're executing them is because human life is sacred, because we take the crime of destroying a life so seriously. By treating these horrible crimes as uniquely evil and giving them the unique punishment of death, we are reinforcing the value of life, not cheapening it. Execution sends the message that killing people is a big deal. But if the punishment for murder is just going to rehab and eating mangoes, that sends the message that murder is no big deal, that human lives aren't that important.
But what if he would have repented later? You're condemning him to hell.
The argument here is one of time. If a murderer gets sentenced to death, he only has a short time to repent before it's too late. But if that same murderer gets life in prison, he has like 60 years to repent. My issue with this argument is that mere length of time isn't everything. You could live for 30 years in a comfortable, middle-class atheist neighborhood and never get saved. But you spend 1 week dodging machine guns in the foxholes, and boom, you turn to Christ. I think you're much more likely to repent when you get sentenced to hanging, and it's this big, looming fear of impending death, and all that guilt and terror washes over you, and the prison chaplain comes in to hear your last confession. Whereas, if you get sentenced to life in prison, there's no immediate fear of death. You're just wallowing in bitterness and hatred. If anything was going to make me hate God, it would be life in prison. If anything was going to make a depraved murderer turn to God, it would be the death penalty, knowing that because of his sin, he only has 1 week to live, and when that week is over, he will meet his maker. Of course, it's true, many of those we execute will go straight to hell. But you can't save everybody. I'd rather send a serial killer to hell than make life a living hell for his victims' families. And we already explained that the death penalty will scare criminals and lead to less overall murders, meaning less overall deaths, meaning all those potential victims have more time to repent. So we might be sending one bastard to hell, but we're buying time for hundreds of others. Again, if that trade-off is too grim for you, I understand, but you shouldn't be doing politics.
Part 3. The Enlightened.
Our last group is the armchair philosophers of the world, the independents. They're not left or right, they see beyond all that. They read a study one time, and it said that the death penalty actually has
no deterrent effect.
The death penalty doesn't actually deter people from committing murders. If it did, we would expect a giant spike in murders when countries abolish the death penalty. First off, even if it wasn't a better deterrent, I would still support the death penalty for all the other reasons we discussed. Secondly, just look at the UK's murder rate since they stopped hanging murderers. But my main problem with this argument is that that's just not how statistics work. There are so many other factors that affect murder rates, like poverty and social programs and general community wellness. All those other factors are always shifting, so the rise in crime caused by abolishing the death penalty might not always show up on the graph. When countries abolish the death penalty, it's usually as they're entering a very modern, affluent period. They make a lot of money, so they become more liberal, so they decide that the electric chair is too uncivilized. So the boost in murders from abolishing the death penalty might be counteracted by the decrease in poverty. But that doesn't mean the death penalty has no deterrent effect. If we had kept the death penalty and lowered poverty, the murder rate might have gone down even farther. So yeah, that's every argument against the death penalty. Some of those arguments are pretty good, but in my opinion, overall, they just don't hold water. There are so many reasons to execute these horrible people. And frankly, if you're still against the death penalty, you really need to consider why you have so much empathy for psychopathic murderers and so little empathy for the families of victims. Like and subscribe, bring back the death penalty, leave a comment. We'll see you next time. God bless America.